This is a story about the day I let an HOA president build 23 luxury rental cabins on my private island, watched them pour every foundation, run every wire, and then pulled out a single piece of paper that made their entire multi-million-dollar project worthless and made me very, very rich. The president, a woman named Vivian Sterling, just laughed in my face when I first told her to stop, before handing me a trespassing bill and bulldozing the only thing left connecting me to my late wife. I'm telling you this from the perspective of an old man who finally understood that sometimes you don't fight fire with fire. You fight it with blueprints and a cold, quiet plan. So grab a coffee, because you have to hear what happened when I finally presented the deed in court and watched their empire shatter. The morning the piece ended started out like any other, only perfect. I was sitting on my dock, on the mainland, shore of the lake, watching the mist lift off the water. 65 years old, 35 of them spent as a civil engineer for the Corps. And this spot, the view across the 30 yards of water to Juniper Island, was the only place I ever felt truly settled. My wife, Clara, and I built that dock together, board by board, the summer I finally retired. Every single nail was a memory of her laughter, of the scent of fresh-cut pine, of her hand in mine as we sat with our feet dangling in the cool water, planning the small cabin we'd eventually build on the island for our daughter, Sarah, and the grandkids. Then I heard it, a deep, grating roar from across the water. It wasn't a fishing boat. It was the distinct growl of heavy diesel machinery. I stood up, coffee mug forgotten, and saw a convoy of construction trucks, a bulldozer and a cement mixer, rolling right over the old, narrow causeway that connected the mainland to my island. My island. Not the island, mine. My grandfather bought it in the 50s. It's been called Stone's Solitude on every county map for 70 years. I puttered across the water in my old John boat. By the time I beached it, a woman was waiting. She was mid-50s, sharp khaki pants, polo shirt with the obnoxious Lakeside Preserve logo, clipboard held like a shield. She introduced herself as Vivian Sterling, the HOA president, and her tone wasn't polite. It was patronizing. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, looking me up and down. "I'm Ethan Stone, and you're trespassing. You need to turn your crew around. This island is private property. It belongs to me." Vivian barely glanced at me, tapping her clipboard with a perfectly manicured nail. "No mistake, Mr. Stone. According to our updated plat, Juniper Island was officially designated as common property for Phase 3 expansion. We're building 23 premium rental cabins here. It'll be a fantastic amenity for our residents." I stared at her, feeling a cold knot tightening in my chest. "Ma'am, with all due respect, your plats are wrong. This land has been in my family for 3 generations. I have the deed. I'd be happy to show it to you. That was my first mistake, wasn't it? Admitting I had to prove something that was already mine." I raced home, my mind reeling, tearing through Clara's meticulous files. She handled everything, organized everything. But the file for the island deed, it wasn't there. I checked the safe, the attic boxes, every single drawer. Nothing. Without that single piece of paper, my claim was just a sentimental story against her lawyer's professionally bound stack of lies. A week later, the certified letter arrived, an official encroachment fine of $250 for obstructing their land use with my unpermitted personal effects, meaning the fire pit and 2 Adirondack chairs I kept near the shore. They were building on my land, and they were billing me for standing on it. The rage started then. A slow, hot burn that had nothing to do with property lines and everything to do with Clara. I went back over the next day. Vivian was there, directing a man with blueprints. I walked right up to her. "This has to stop. You are destroying a memorial to my late wife. I am asking you to pack up and leave." She turned, her face a mask of patronizing pity. Not even. Looking at the trees they were dropping. "Mr. Stone, I understand this is emotional for you, but you need to see the bigger picture. We are increasing your property value. You should be thanking us." That was the moment the logic ended. She saw my grief as a weakness to be managed, not a right to be respected. And as I stood there speechless, she gave a little nod to the bulldozer operator. "Clear the shoreline, all of it," she commanded, her voice cutting through the noise. I yelled, "No, stop, that's my dock!" But she just watched, that same smug smirk on her face. The bulldozer lunged forward, and with a horrifying, splintering crash, it tore through the structure in seconds, reducing a lifetime of my most precious memories to a pile of broken, floating lumber. I just stood there, watching it happen. I tried the system. I filed a formal trespass complaint with the county, detailing the ownership history. A couple of weeks later, an inspector, a tired-looking bureaucrat named Jenkins, came out. Vivian was already there, of course, with her slick corporate lawyer. The lawyer simply pulled out his thick binder of updated, approved plats, soil reports, and impact statements. Jenkins flipped through the pages, looked at the impressive stamps, looked at me, an old man with just a story, and shrugged. "It's a civil issue, sir, not a county one. Looks like their paperwork is in order." Hope died a little that day. The very next morning, Vivian installed a 10-foot chain-link fence across the causeway. They had officially fenced me out of my own island. My neighbors, people I'd known for decades, just looked at their shoes. "You know how Vivian is, Ethan," one whispered. "She fined my wife $50 because our mailbox flag was leaning a degree too far. I can't afford to get on her bad side." I was completely on my own. The frustration and the fines started mounting. Sarah, my daughter, called, her voice tight with worry. "Dad, they're draining you. What's next? A lien on your house? They have lawyers, insurance, a war chest. Please, just let it go. It's just land." Her words stung because she was trying to protect me, but she didn't understand. It wasn't just land, it was the last piece of Clara I had left. "I can't do that, honey," I said quietly, and the silence on the other end felt like 1,000 miles. Then came the kill shot. A brutally professional letter from my homeowner's insurance, cancelling my policy due to liability concerns arising from ongoing property disputes with an adjacent commercial development. Vivian had flagged me as a risk. Without insurance, my mortgage would be in default. I could lose my home. Everything. That evening I stood on my shoreline staring across the water. The sun was setting, casting a golden light on the 23 perfect little cabins. They looked solid, permanent. They had won. The hot rage was gone, replaced by a deep, crushing wave of defeat. Was Sarah right? Was I just a stubborn old fool throwing his life away on a memory? I walked back inside, sat at my old wooden desk, and just stared at the wall. Then slowly, I reached down and pulled open the bottom drawer. Lying on top of Clara's reading glasses was a single, crisp, manila envelope. The one with the notary's stamp. You see, while they were building their 23 cabins, I was building my case. For 4 months, the construction noise was my alarm clock, but I wasn't idle. Twice a week I drove 30 miles to the county seat archives. I wasn't looking for my missing deed anymore. I was looking for theirs. I found the developer submission, and there it was, the tiny, critical flaw. In this state, a formal land transfer has to be recorded with the state registry, not just filed with the local county office to get permits. There was no state seal, no registration number. They had built a multi-million-dollar project on an unrecorded, legally worthless piece of paper. That was the first crack in the foundation. Next, I called an old friend, Old Man Hollis, the retired county surveyor. We were in the same engineering battalion decades apart. When I showed up with a box of donuts, he sat me down. He looked at the old, unsigned draft survey I'd found in my workshop. I remember this one, Ethan, he said. Old Man Hemlock did this survey. He was a stickler. See this notation here? That's an iron pin, 3/4-inch rebar, driven 5 feet into the ground. Hemlock used them to mark every corner. Paper can lie, Ethan. People can lie. But 100 pounds of iron driven into granite doesn't just get up and walk away. He gave me the original coordinates for the 4 corner markers from his personal sacred logbooks. Armed with those, I hired a modern surveying firm. I didn't tell them about the HOA fight. I just gave them a technical job, a full boundary survey of my parcel, verified with Hollis's coordinates and cross-referenced with satellite topographical data. I wanted undeniable proof, measured down to the centimeter. 2 weeks later, a courier delivered a thick envelope. Inside was a certified survey map, heavy paper, with a raised seal. It showed my property lines in a thick black line, and scattered inside that black line like red measles were the precise GPS plotted locations of all 23 cabins. Every single one, from the front steps to the back porch, was squarely, entirely on my land. The weapon was ready. It just needed to be loaded. I didn't sue them immediately. Lawsuits are loud, and I needed quiet. I went to the courthouse and filed a quiet title action. It's a simple legal request that asks a judge to officially decide who owns the land. The court sends a notice to anyone who might have a claim, giving them 30 days to prove it. I knew Vivian. When that notice landed on her desk, she didn't see a threat. She saw nuisance mail from a bitter recluse. She probably laughed and tossed it in the trash, confident that her lawyer had already settled everything. She didn't even bother to reply. 31 days later, I stood before a judge in a nearly empty courtroom. He looked at my certified survey, Hollis's coordinate logs, and the unbroken chain of deeds my family had held since 1954. He looked at the empty defense table where the HOA should have been. He banged his gavel once, signed a court order confirming my absolute exclusive ownership of the 7-acre island, and that was it. They just didn't know it yet. But a piece of paper doesn't stop a bulldozer. I'd learned that lesson the hard way. I needed leverage, heavy leverage. I called up some old engineering colleagues. I asked them hypothetically, what would happen if a developer built 23 residential units on land they didn't own, without state-level septic permits, directly over a protected watershed? You could hear the whistle over the phone. That's a federal EPA violation, Ethan. The fines alone would bankrupt a small town. Armed with my new court order and a list of specific code violations, I didn't go to the HOA. I went to the County Environmental Enforcement Division. The next morning, the cavalry arrived, 3 county code enforcement trucks. I watched from my porch with binoculars as they crossed the causeway, ignored Vivian's private access sign, and slapped bright orange stopwork, "Do not occupy" stickers on the door of every single cabin. It was the most beautiful decoration I'd ever seen. Vivian Sterling exploded. I could hear her shrieking across the water as she tried to physically block a county worker from tagging the model unit. Within the hour, an emergency email went out to every resident. Urgent community meeting, resident obstruction. She was going to try to crush me publicly once and for all. The community center was packed that night. The mood was ugly. People were worried about their property values, scared by the sudden arrival of county enforcement. I walked in quietly, 10 minutes late, wearing my old field jacket, and stood comfortably in the back row. Vivian was at the podium, red-faced, whipping the crowd into a frenzy. "We have spent millions improving this community," she shouted into the mic, "and one man, because of a personal vendetta, is trying to sabotage your investment. We are filing an immediate lawsuit against Ethan Stone for malicious interference and obstruction of commerce. We will take his house if we have to." The room erupted. People turned and glared at me. It was a mob, and she was holding the pitchforks. I waited for the noise to die down just a little, then pushed off the wall and started walking down the center aisle. It's a long walk when 300 people hate your guts. Vivian saw me coming and smiled that nasty, triumphant little smile. "Oh, look who decided to show up. Do you have something to say for yourself, Mr. Stone?" I reached the front of the room. I didn't go to the microphone. I walked right up to the table where the board was sitting. I didn't yell. I just spoke loud enough for the first few rows to hear me clearly. "Before you file that lawsuit, Vivian, you might want to check your paperwork one more time." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the certified court order, stamped with the state seal. I dropped it on the table in front of the board. It hit the wood with a heavy, decisive thud that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. "That is a court order from Judge Reynolds," I said, my voice steady. "It was issued 3 days ago. It confirms that I am the sole legal owner of Juniper Island, and it designates every structure you built on it as an illegal encroachment." Vivian's face went pale. She grabbed the paper, her hands shaking. This is fake. We have the plats." I leaned in close so only she and the board could hear. "Your plats are unrecorded drafts. My deed is court verified. You didn't build an expansion, Vivian. You built 23 luxury cabins completely on my land. I turned to face the room. The silence was absolute. And as of this morning, I said, raising my voice so the back row could hear, I'm evicting you. Chaos broke loose. Vivian snatched the court order, shrieking, He's a liar and a fraud! But just as the uproar reached its peak, the back door opened. A mild-mannered man in a county uniform walked in. Cliff Marks, the chief records clerk from the courthouse. I had called him an hour earlier as a favor. Ma'am, Cliff said, his voice quiet but carrying through the microphone Vivian had. Left on. That is an official order from the Superior Court, signed by Judge Reynolds. I processed it myself 3 days ago. It's as real as this podium. The truth landed with the force of a physical blow. The power drained from Vivian's. A board member in the front row stood up. Vivian, what is he talking about? You told us the land was zoned and cleared. The mob she had created just minutes before had turned, and now they were coming for her. I stepped up to the microphone. It's simpler than all that, I said, pulling out the certified survey map and unfolding it on the wall for everyone to see. The original surveyor drove iron pins into the ground to mark the corners of my family's property. They never moved. Your document, I held up her unrecorded plat, was never filed with the state. You can't just draw new lines on a map and call it yours. As Vivian tried to push her way through the angry crowd toward the exit, the doors opened again. This time, it wasn't a county clerk. It was 2 county sheriff's deputies. And my daughter, Sarah, was standing right behind them, recording everything on her phone. One of the deputies stepped forward and handed Vivian a stack of papers. Vivian Sterling, you are being served with a cease and desist order for trespassing on private property, as well as citations for multiple environmental and building code violations. You are to remove yourself from the premises immediately. It was the final public humiliation. Vivian's face crumpled. She started to cry, not tears of remorse, but of pure, cornered rage. You can't do this to me, she wailed as the news crews, who had been lingering outside since her ribbon cutting, pushed their way in. She was screaming about her lawyers and her rights as the deputies calmly escorted her out of the building. The implosion of the Lakeside Preserve Community Association was faster than I could have imagined. The remaining board members, realizing they were legally on the hook for millions, resigned on the spot. Sarah's video of Vivian's meltdown went viral locally. Within a week, the residents voted to dissolve the HOA with a 98% majority. The lawyers they hired to untangle the financial mess discovered Vivian and her developer partner had been cooking the books for years. She was facing charges for fraud and embezzlement on top of the environmental violations. I was left with the biggest problem I've ever had. 23 brand new, half-finished, and completely illegal cabins. An engineer doesn't destroy a well-built structure if he can find a better use for it. So I spent the next 2 months on Juniper Island, not as a victim, but as a project manager. I hired my own crews, honest ones this time. We brought every single cabin up to code, drilled new wells, installed state-approved septic systems, and remediated the land. I paid for it all out of my savings, a final gamble on my own competence. When everything was done, permitted, and inspected, I had 23 pristine lakeside cabins, fully legal and ready for market. I put them up for sale, not as rentals, but as individual properties. They sold in less than a month at the peak of the summer season. The profit was staggering. Sarah sat with me at my kitchen table, looking at the final bank statement. You're rich, Dad, she said, her voice full of awe. You could buy a yacht, travel the world. I just shook my head. The money was never the point. It was a tool, a byproduct of setting things right. The next day I wrote 2 checks. The first, repaid my savings account down to the penny. The second check was for half of the remaining total, made out to a national trust that builds mortgage-free homes for wounded veterans and their families. I mailed it with a short, simple letter, in memory of my wife, Clara Stone. She always believed a home was the safest harbor in the world. That was my victory, turning the ugliest chapter of my life into a legacy she would have been proud of. The change in the community was immediate. Once the HOA signs came down, it felt like everyone could breathe again. My neighbor, Gary, the one who'd been too, afraid to speak up, came over one weekend with his 2 sons and a truck full of lumber. "Heard you might be in need of a new dock, Ethan," he said, looking a little embarrassed. "We'd be honored to help." We spent a whole Saturday building a new dock, stronger and better than the one Clara and I built, but with the same spirit. That afternoon, as we sat drinking cold beers, Gary proposed something. He said the lake didn't feel like Lakeside Preserve anymore. At the next town council meeting, he officially petitioned to have our little corner of the lake renamed. The motion passed unanimously. The sun is coming up now. I'm sitting on the new dock, a hot mug of black coffee in my hands. The mist is burning off the water. It's quiet again, the deep, settling quiet I thought I had lost forever. Across the water, on Juniper Island, lights are starting to come on in the windows of the cabins. New families are waking up, starting their own memories. They're good neighbors, we all are now. They thought they could take a man's peace with a piece of paper, but paper burns, stone lasts. A few weeks ago, the last remnant of the old world came down. Someone took down the big, ugly HOA sign at the entrance to our road. In its place, there's a new one. It's hand-painted on a nice piece of cedar in simple, friendly letters. It just says, "Welcome to Stone's Landing. Respect the lake." But, listen, here's my question for you. I want to know what you think. Did I go too far? Was it right to let them finish the construction, or should I have stopped them earlier, even if it meant a decade of litigation? And when does a community organization stop being about community and start being an engine of power and greed? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to smash that like button if you believe in fighting for your family's legacy.